In this video, I reflect on my context and audience experience and learnings, covering my dissertation, self-directed project, and external engagement. Going into context and audience, I was concerned about writing a dissertation, as I have never enjoyed or excelled at essay writing, and the literature review I produced in practice and research was not really a review of the literature I had read to that point, but more of a mini essay. For the first part of the course, I worked at the dissertation diligently. However, the feedback at points 4 and 5 was that what I had written to that point was descriptive and did not make an attempt to analyse or interrogate the information I'd found. In addition, what I had written was not about photography, but was more of a social history of Britain in the 1970s, and that my use of images did not relate to the topics in the text. At this point, my initial fears had been confirmed. However, it forced me to think again about the question I was seeking to answer, the collective work I was exploring, and the approach I was taking to analyse the similarities and differences between them and whether or not these were significant. This was a major turning point, and in all honesty, one that I should have reached at a much earlier stage. Having now completed the dissertation, there are some key learnings that I can take away should I decide to write another one, even though this is highly unlikely. First, in addition to reading widely, it's necessary to come up with a way of recording where useful information can be found, as too often I spent a lot of time trying to remember where a quote or a paragraph that I had previously discovered was located, and in some instances I never did. Although I became better at this as I progressed, being more disciplined about note-taking and recording from the start would have saved me a lot of time. Second is to think carefully about the question you're seeking to answer. My original question was too broad and undefined. The final question was a more concise version, which resulted in a more obvious compare and contrast structure and made writing much more straightforward. Third is not only to read books, articles and other written material, but to look at the images. I found myself guilty of trying to write about works containing hundreds of images without taking the time to look at them and consider them in relation to one another. For my self-directed project, I wanted to develop the idea that I'd used in the previous unit, but with some changes. Initially, these changes related to the images. In practice and research, I photographed people holding a notepad with their thoughts written on it. The photographs were taken in landscape format, as this enabled me to include background information within the frame. For context and audience, I decided to photograph people in portrait format against a plain background, so that they alone were the subject of the image. Initially I used the same approach of people writing their thoughts on a notepad and holding that whilst they were photographed. However, I felt that it was a bit more of the same, and it didn't really allow people to express their thoughts in a more considered or expansive way. In one of the peer feedback sessions, a fellow student suggested giving the people I photographed postcards and then asking them to write down their thoughts and send them back to me. I liked this idea and started handing out postcards when photographing people. Initially, I had a good response, but over time, fewer people sent their postcards back. Reflecting on this now, I think that there are two reasons for the fall-off in responses. As well as changing my style of photographing people, I also became more selective about the people I approached. I was looking for people whose appearance made them stand out from the crowd, and as a result, I photographed significantly fewer people than I did for my work for practice and research. In percentage terms, the response rate was probably similar throughout the project, but in absolute terms, as I photographed fewer people, I received fewer responses. I also think I was very lucky at the start, with several people responding, and thinking about it now, I realise that my expectations were unrealistic, and that however well-intentioned people were, most people have more important things to do with their lives than to write to photography students with their thoughts about the state of the country. I feel that there is a connection between the work produced by the photography collectives that I looked at in my dissertation and my self-directed project. Although very different in approach, I think that they are both examples of social documentary photography, which is people-focused, and in which the subjects of the photographs are able to engage with the viewer by sharing their thoughts. The works that I examined by Amber, Exit and the Hackney Flashers or use text in conjunction with the photographs to give them greater meaning, and I have attempted to do the same. Overall, I'm pleased with what I've produced, but feel this is as far as I can take this idea. Having been made aware that photographing strangers did not fulfil the external engagement element of the course, I went about trying to find a venue where I could display some of the work I had created for my self-directed project. I was fortunate to be able to exhibit some of the portraits of people I'd photographed and the responses I received at a local community centre. The process of thinking about what to exhibit and hanging the works was totally new for me, and whilst there were no major issues, there were things I would do differently for any future exhibitions. Overall, I've found this unit challenging, particularly the written element, but I think that I have benefited from being forced to move out of my comfort zone, and I now have a clearer idea of what type of photography I find engaging.